welcome everybody.
All right, I'm doing well.
Yeah, we're curious as to who you are and where you are. So this is a great opportunity to pull up the chat box and type in your name and your organization and where you're located so we can see who we've got and where you all are.
Okay. Okay, so do you think we're ready, Eden? Pretty good? Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. As Andy has mentioned, we're delighted to have you today to the webinar series for Corfa and the Refuge Association. My name is Sue Wilder, and I'm on the board of the directors for Corfa and helping out with the webinar series. So before we get started, I'd like to recognize a few other Corfa and Refuge Association folks. I know Cheryl Hart is on the presentation today. Cheryl's our vice president, as well as our president, Joan Patterson, is on today. From the Refuge Association, I see Eden Taylor, who is our medicinal technical wizard behind the scenes, helping us do all the moving of the presentation and making sure the presentation flows for you today. Cheryl or Joan, am I missing anybody else? I don't see Marco, but he could be here.
I don't think there's anybody from NWRA that I've seen.
Very good. All right. Well, having given you a few of the folks that are behind the scenes, let's wanted to present to you some announcements, and I was going to turn it over to Joan Patterson for some announcements.
And so the one announcement that I have is something just for people to think about and maybe develop some alternative plans. You know, you probably all have heard that there is no federal budget, you know, as of October 1st. And we really hope that that situation will change. But there is talk of a potential shutdown. And we just, like I say, hope that doesn't happen. But keep in mind, if you've got events planned for the first part of October, Refuge Week events, Walk for the Wild, just give some thought to what's my plan B. So you don't have to cancel your events, but maybe you hold them someplace else. Refuges, if there's a shutdown, refuges in all probability will be closed, just like the national parks and all. So be thinking of your alternative B. One thing you may want to do is just contact your members of Congress and express to them too how much you really don't want the government to shut down, and perhaps talk to them about the impact that it would have on your organization if that were to happen. So that's it for me.
All right. Well, thank you, Joan. All right. And one other announcement, I just want to let you know, since we'll be going a little bit longer today, we've allotted 90 minutes for today's presentation because we're sure there'll be a lot of good engagement. So we wanted to give a lot of time for that. But we do have some upcoming webinars. Our October webinar will be about using events for fundraising. And so that ought to be a really nice time of the year to talk about fundraising, since many of us will be having our events and trying to fundraise. In November, on November 15th, we'll be having a talk with some folks about the differences between Friends volunteers and Fish and Wildlife volunteers. So that ought to be a really good introduction for us to sort of help us understand the differences between the two. And that's November 15th and October 18th. So save those dates. And I think with that, with the announcements behind us, we'll talk about today's presentation. I'm excited to have Andy Robinson. We are all excited about having Andy Robinson back with us, who is going to present to us on succession planning, a very, very important topic for our friends groups. Many of you know Andy from previous webinars we've had in the past, and we're delighted to have him back. He's a professional trainer and consultant who's worked for various nonprofits, businesses, and government agencies that help he helps to spread the word about fundraising, board development, marketing, leadership, and then today's topic, succession planning. Again, I'll just remind everybody that we have allotted 90 minutes for today's session. And with that, I will turn it over to Andy. Thank you, Andy, for coming today.
Sue, thank you for inviting me. Thanks to Joan and Cheryl and Eden and Marco and all the people who have supported this, getting us on air and organized. So I appreciate all that help. Let me explain the process here. My job is to present some material. We're also going to have some polls so we can get a sense of where you are in this whole process. And we're also going to have a couple of breakouts where you'll have a chance to talk to each other. Eden is manning the technology. Thank you, Eden. Joan and Sue and Cheryl are my backup singers today. They will not actually be singing, which just makes me
That's a good
sad.
thing.
But
Thank goodness.
Yes.
they're keeping an eye on the chat. And also, I might throw you all some questions and have them try and answer them too. So 3 of you look lively. I really encourage comments and questions throughout. And so if you drop questions into chat, we'll try and address them throughout. We've also allotted some time at the end for Q&A, and I'll even stick around for overtime. If we don't get all the questions answered by the time we finish at the bottom of the hour, I'll stay here and we'll keep talking until you're done asking questions. We'll send you the slide deck. We will also send you the link to the recording. We are recording this today. And Eden, we will do our best to turn off the recording during breakouts and turn it back on when we come back from the breakouts. So thank you all for that. I'm going to jump into the deck here. I'm Andy, consultant, trainer, facilitator. I'm sort of the Swiss Army knife of nonprofit consultants. I do a little bit of everything. I'm also a board chair. So I am living this reality from both sides of the table. I support nonprofits and I'm deeply embedded in one. And I've actually learned a lot as a board chair. Why are you here? Why is this topic important to you? What do you want to learn? And this is a great chance to use the chat box. So go ahead and fill it up. While we're doing that, Joan, I'm going to start with you, so I'll have you unmute. And I know you've thought about this a lot, and we've talked about this some. Why is this subject important to the friends groups, and maybe even why is it important to you?
So why is it important to me?
Sure.
I'll start with that because I know that I've been a part of, Corpus since it started.
Yep.
And it's time for change. There's time for new leadership. It's time for new thoughts. And I need to move aside. How do I do that? And, I'm looking for advice on that. How do I stop saying yes to doing things and start saying somebody else can,
I love it.
And I think that this is true for everybody.
Yeah, so this is going to be a therapy session with about 50 people in it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Cheryl, you're keeping an eye on chat. What do we see in here? What are people asking for? And please unmute.
Yes, I see one comment. We are in the process of restructuring our board and need to recruit new members.
Yep.
Another is learn about best practices, everything Joan said.
Yep.
So far, that's it for the comments in the chat.
That's helpful.
Here comes another one, I think, though.
Okay.
Maybe not.
This is good. This gets us started. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about succession planning 101, the basics. I'm going to show you a model of how organizations grow and change over time. It's called the 4 stages. And I think this is actually a tool to help you think about succession planning and recruiting the next generation of leadership for your group. We'll talk about the leadership skills you need to do this. And then there's a lot of nuts and bolts and tips and hacks and tools and sort of the tactical things you need to do this. So I am curious of what your primary title is today. And I appreciate that some of you wear multiple titles. I do as well. Go ahead and respond to the poll if you would. Pick the primary hat you are wearing during this webinar today. Here they come. Love this. And we'll leave it open for about another 10 seconds. So jump in there. Nice. We get a good mix. Anybody else? Last call. Beautiful. Eden, would you end it and display it, please? So if you look at it, everybody, you can see we've got 6 chairs or presidents. We have 19, biggest number, board members or volunteers. We have 3 executive directors, CEOs, 1 person who's another staff member, and then we have a couple of random folks who are consultants, funders, or others. So this is pretty good. I am appreciative, especially that the vast majority of you who are here are actually on boards. And so you're wearing that hat, and that is absolutely our target audience. So that's great. Let's go ahead and close this down. And we'll go to the next slide. So I'm curious to know where you are now. And it says, do you have a perpetual mission? I think, we discussed this as we were preparing for this. Most friends groups sort of do have a perpetual mission because the refuge or the hatchery is in principle going to be there in perpetuity for a long, long time. So again, in principle, there is support needed for that organization over time. But here's the deal. If you have a perpetual mission, how many of you will be around for the victory party? And the answer is none of you, because the organization is going to be here forever and you won't. So I'm going to make a bold statement, which is if you are not actively recruiting, engaging, supporting, lifting up the next generation of leadership within your friends group, by definition, you are flunking the mission. Because if you have a mission that is supposed to go on for a long time and you don't have that leadership pipeline built, then the organization goes away. So this feels like something you should be doing tomorrow or next year or when you have the time to get around to it, because there's so many other things to do. And my job today is to move it up your to-do list and to help you think about it with a little more urgency. Definition: identifying and supporting the next generation of leadership for your organization. It's pretty straightforward. Leadership means a lot of things. It could be the board, could be key volunteers, could be staff, could be partners that you work with, trying to strengthen them as well. And you can't control what entities do that are outside of your organization, but you can model good behavior, right? You can have a succession plan. You can have a process. You can bring in new leadership. And people can see that you're doing that and go, huh, how did you do that? Or what's the rationale? Or what can I learn from you? So by doing this well, you can actually strengthen your own organization, but you may end up strengthening partners and peers as well, which is awesome if that happens. So I want to get into this 4 stages thing, but here's the argument. As organizations grow and change, the people you need, the skills you need, the attitude you need at one stage ain't necessarily what you need in your next stage of organizational life. And, we may not get into this in any depth today, but this is one of the arguments for term limits, for having board members who serve a certain number of years and then they have to term off the board. And that sort of forces you to bring in new perspectives and new blood. So where's this coming? Oh, it's coming up. That's good. If you're a founder, if you started your organization, if you started any organization, I love you. You're awesome. You make stuff happen. And you can be a problem too. I was just on the phone today with a woman who runs a nonprofit in my community, and the nonprofit literally has her name on it. And she is the founder. She is the alpha. She's the energy. She's done an amazing thing, but she's got other volunteers and people working with her, and they're trying to figure out the power dynamic of how do other people be empowered while the founder is on the scene. And it's difficult. So my challenge to you as a founder, if you're here today, is what's your succession plan? Like, how are you creating opportunities for other people to grow and take responsibility and build their power? And how are you doing that in a way that doesn't feel like a threat to you? Now, let's talk about boomers. Here I am. I am 66 years old. I was born in 1957, which was apparently the peak year of the baby boom. So I am the boomiest of the boomer. And what we've seen in my generation is that they're hanging on pretty tight, especially people who are in leadership or nonprofits who have, executive director jobs, CEO jobs. They get in there and they stay for a while. And while I want to appreciate that you may be doing excellent work, and I also want to appreciate that you're probably underpaid, so you don't have enough money in the bank to retire the way you want to, which is why you're still working. You got to create some more space for that next generation. There is a bit of a glass ceiling, and I don't mean gender-wise, I mean age-wise. So I would say this for the paid staff, but I think it's also true on the board side. And Joan sort of referenced this already. A lot of us need our own personal succession plans. So I want to quote my colleague, Kim Klein. Kim is one of the gurus. Some of you have had the chance to work with her. She's a great fundraising trainer. And Kim says, I'll quote here, when you walk in the office door in the morning, the first thing you should ask yourself is, what am I going to do today to replace myself? And this is a challenge for some folks to think this way, but I think it's absolutely the right mindset. Like, how do I make myself irrelevant? How do I get out of the way and let other people have the power, have the responsibility, have the creative authority? What is my work in supporting others as opposed to just getting through my to-do list today? So here's a model that I learned from a group called the Institute for Conservation Leadership, which is a support organization for the environmental community. And some of you have worked with ICL in the past. They're great. And they learned it from a guy named Carl Mathiasen, who's an organizational development guru who recently passed away, probably in the last 3-4 years. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'll walk you through it, and then we'll find out where you are on this model. At the far end, on the left, we have the all-volunteer organizations. No staff, just volunteers. And generally, they start two ways. Either you have a leading group, which is a collective. It's a cluster of people who come together to create something. Or maybe you have a following group where there is that charismatic founder person who is the energy and the vision and the face of the organization, and other people are supporting them. Groups can exist in this stage for a really long time. I belong to a group in Vermont that was an all-volunteer organization for about 75 years. And we hired our first staff a decade ago. It didn't work so good. We let that staff go. We went back to being an all-volunteer organization. And in the last 3 or 4 years, we've hired staff again, which means we're trying to get to this next stage, which is called the leap. And leap is when you hire that first person. Maybe you open an office, or you get a website, or you get a social media account, or you start getting letterhead, or you have a phone number that people can call. And it's when we start to professionalize, and it's called the leap because it's sort of scary. Like, you got that first person in there, and are they going to make it? And did you hire the right person? And do they have the supports they need to be effective? Some groups move to the next stage, which is called shared governance or shared leadership. And it's sort of a sweet spot. You've got the staff, maybe enough staff to do the basic work, maybe enough staff so that each of them can specialize a little. You've got the board knows its role. They're doing governance well. Nice spot. Some organizations move further down the line to the right to where we call institutions or institutional stage. And I think you know what institutions are. They're big, they're muscular, they have a big brand, they often have a lot of resources, they have power. Now, I don't want to make a value judgment here because I think there's value at all 4 of these stages. And I would also say some organizations, and I mentioned this already, don't always move to the right. Sometimes they move to the left. Sometimes they take a step back, and that can be a good thing too. So the reason I'm presenting this, and we're going to dive into this in a minute, is that I will argue the leadership you need at each stage is a little different. The skill set, the mindset, maybe the personality. Each of these levels requires a different kind of leadership, different kind of board, different kind of job descriptions. And one of the mistakes I consistently see is that groups are recruiting board members or recruiting staff for where they are now on the scale as opposed to where they're trying to go. And the argument I will make is that we need to be recruiting and building towards the future, not the present, which requires we have to have some idea of where we're heading. Like, what does the future look like for our organization? So I'm curious, and I realize this is sort of an imperfect model because they all are, but which of these 4 stages comes closest to describing where your group is now? And so go ahead and give it your best answer, and let's see what we've got. A lot of grassroots groups. This is not surprising, and it's also sort of cool. Note to Corfa and the Refuge Association, this is data. This is actually interesting data about who your constituents are. So let's share it, please. So 2/3 of the people in the room are engaged with all volunteer organizations. And I want to praise you in a minute, but I'll hold that. We have 11% who are at the stage where they just hired the first staff and they're one staff trying to figure it out organizations. We have a handful in shared governance. We have 1 institution, and we have a couple who are not sure, and that's totally fine. Here's what I want to say about the all volunteer organizations. Go ahead and close the poll, please. Something like half of the nonprofit organizations in this country are unstaffed. A lot of them are unincorporated, like they don't even have 501c3s or anything like that. They're informal, community-based, ultra grassroots organizations. There is a funder that I have worked with in the past called the New England Grassroots Environment Fund. I live in Vermont and I work regionally a lot. And the New England Grassroots Environment Fund, about half of the groups they support are unincorporated. And these are organizations where if you give them a $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 grant, it is a big deal. And they're doing amazing work. So I want to do a shout out to the people in the room. If you are one of those grassroots, all volunteer, informal, unstructured organizations, you have value. We need you. You are the baseline of the pyramid of all these groups. Now, it doesn't mean you don't need systems. It doesn't mean you don't need succession planning. It may or may not need that you want to have staff in the future. That's a conversation. But you have power. And you have more muscle than you realize. So let's talk a little bit about what I think, and this is where I'm going to ask Sue and Cheryl and Joan to weigh in as they feel the need to do so. If I were going to prioritize what the board should be doing in each of these stages, here's what I would say. It's on this slide. And what you'll notice, I'll give you a second to read it. I don't need to read it out loud. But what you'll notice is as you move through this model, the board is doing probably less hands-on grunt work and more strategic thinking and more long-term planning. And what also happens as you move through this model is that these groups become less volunteer-driven and more staff-driven. And I don't think that's inherently good or bad. I think it's just sort of how it works. And I'll say it again, one of the intentions of this webinar is to have you ask the question, who do we want to be when we grow up? How soon do we want to grow up? And what's the skill set we need on the board and the staff as we are recruiting for the future? Is it the stuff we're doing now, or do we need to bring in people who can do things differently than we do now? So Sue or Cheryl or Joan, any of you are welcome to reflect on what you're seeing here if you'd like to.
Yeah, Andy. So I'm thinking about our organization, and we're an all volunteer organization, but it's funny because some of the folks have mentioned that they would like to be less operations and more sort of leadership kind of roles, and they don't like actually having to make decisions about operations and stuff. And so I think it's like we want to grow, but we don't know how to grow. We don't know how to make that leap. We don't know what that trigger would be to make that leap.
Yeah, so one of the challenges of making the leap is, can you afford payroll?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because once you hire somebody, you got to raise enough money to pay them every 2 weeks or every month. That is, that's inescapable.
Yeah.
So it becomes a conversation about, can we bring in X amount of money that's going to employ even a part-time, maybe a half-time staff person to delegate to. So Sue,
Right.
you're asking a classic question, which is how do we make that leap? And the answer is fearlessly. And sometimes you do it. Sometimes you leap and you don't get to the other side. And, again, I told you a story about a group I'm involved with where we hired our first staff and we decided, A, we couldn't afford it. B, we didn't like having staff that much. And we thought we were more effective as an all volunteer organization. So we went in the other direction. 10 years later, we hired staff again with a different job description and a different role. So it was this sort of grand experiment. And this new iteration is working great. And one of the reasons we did is what you just said, like the board was tired of doing all the operational stuff, right? They were tired of opening the building and cleaning the floors and running all the programs and doing that stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's an awesome question. I don't have a great answer, but the limiting factor is usually money.
Yeah.
So I want to warn you, in a minute, we're going to put you in breakouts and have you discuss this with each other. Before we go there, I will give Cheryl and or Joan a chance to weigh in on this.
Andy, I was just going to say, we have kind of what I think is would not be a normal situation, where years ago we hired a part-time administrative assistant because our new president was a younger person, full-time employed, and didn't have time to be at the office and open the mail and pay the bills.
Yeah.
That person then grew into what we called an administrator, took on more and more of the administrative work of the organization, but not the representing the organization.
Right.
I guess
Right.
is the best way to say that. She has now grown into our executive director, and she does represent the organization. So that was partly done just because of what you said. We started out without a huge payroll, and gradually as the organization grew, we were able to grow the payroll and give her more and more duties. I don't know that there are very many people who could have filled all those roles as well as she has and does. Right. I think that's a unique situation that I think we have. But that's the way we did.
And I think it's brilliant. And I think what happened is you bootstrapped it, right? Okay, we're going to bring somebody on for 15 hours a week or whatever, and we're going to give them administrative tasks. And then that person shows some mettle and shows some talent. And you're like, okay, let's see if we can find another 10 hours a week of salary. And let's bump them up to some programming or some outreach, right? And you sort of do it in stages. And
that's exactly
what you said,
happened.
Cheryl. Yeah, and what you said is very powerful because I'll just say this out loud. If you're hiring a one-person staff and you have the wrong one person, it's a problem, right? You can't. That person can't hide. On the other hand, if you hire well and they are willing to grow into the job, I think what you said is awesome, and I think it's actually more common than you realize. All right, so I want to give you guys a chance to talk about this. And when you come back, we'll also check chat and take a minute to answer some questions. The question we're going to ask you is, what leadership skills will be required to take your organization to the next level? As you think about your growth arc, if you have a growth arc, what are you recruiting for? And, then the how, if you have the time, it's the how are you going to recruit or acquire those skills? What leadership skills do you need next, to keep it simple? And I'll even put this in chat and send it out when you get in your breakouts. What's going to happen is Eden's going to set up breakouts, 3 or 4 people. Take a minute and introduce yourselves. You may even know some of the people you end up with. And then we're going to give you like 6-7 minutes on this one. So just go around the circle with your 2 or 3 partners and talk a little bit about where your organization is heading and specific leadership skills that you think you need to get there. And then when we come back, we'll have you put your answers in chat. So Eden, do me the favor and queue up the breakouts. I think people have all done this by now, but the way this works is you'll be invited to go into a room, and when you go into the room, I will encourage you to turn on your cameras. You don't have to, but that is helpful so you can all see each other. And we'll send you a notice midway through and say you've got 3 minutes or something like that. So please meet some neighbors, and we'll have you back here soon. And you can go ahead and stop the recording, please. Back, everybody. Thank you for turning on the recording.
Good job, Eden.
So,
Yay.
yeah, Cheryl and I have been having a conversation about barriers to diversity on boards and how do we think about that differently. And I think we'll get into this in a minute. But first of all, I would love to have you drop into chat anything you learned in the breakouts. And it could be something you learned about your own organization or maybe something you learned about others. You know, the prompt here is the skills question. But if you want to respond in a different way, that's fine. And Joan, you're back, so I'm going to pick on you. You were in a breakout. Give me one takeaway from that conversation.
I think it may not have answered your questions, Andy, but
I'm
one of
fine
the
with that.
things that I heard, we had Stacy in our group who works for Fish and Wildlife Service, and to hear that, Fish and Wildlife Service has a real concern about how, because we're small groups, how vulnerable we are, and that it doesn't take much for something to happen and the group is either, no longer effective. So that was a big thing, and how important the working on secession and bringing up new leadership is to not just friends organizations, but to their partners.
To Fish and Wildlife, yeah. And to the Refuge Association and to other peer, I mean, that's a big, thank you for raising that up. I think that's powerful. It's like you aren't on an island, you're actually accountable to other people, and they value your work. And so if, using the bad part of this, if you go under, if you disappear, it's not just about your organization disappearing, it actually leaves a hole in the whole network. So thank you, Stacy, for saying that on behalf of Fish and Wildlife. I think that's a big deal. So let's see. Cheryl, I'll have you take a look at chat. Yes. What are you hearing back?
Okay, from Angela, and Angela's over at Cannon Beach. That's trying to think of, on the Oregon coast.
Sure, I know Cannon Beach.
Similar challenges recruiting new board members in rural areas to increase capacity of current organization.
Yeah, and I live in a rural area, and it's certainly recruitment is an issue in many rural places. So thank you for naming that. Anything else in chat?
Yes, Everett says strategic planning is important in defining an organization.
Okay, good.
Denise says diverse group, 45, 200 and 700 plus members. I don't know what the 45, 200 means. 700 plus members, one has no refuge staff. Oh, okay, different. I'm apparently 3 different friends groups.
Got it. Okay.
Marketing and public relations is a key development for our organizations. We're trying to relate to donors. We're losing some of our donor base because of the Hurricane Ian. So we have to develop new relationships. Strategic planning is important to directing the organization to continued success and sustainability. Present challenge seems to be more about how to adopt an organizational attitude instead of a club feel. And we seem to be trying to go from stage 1 to stage 4 in one giant leap. Boy, does that sound familiar.
Good luck with that. Yeah, and Cheryl and I were talking on the break about how to do outreach to bring in a more diverse audience and to bring in a more diverse board. And diversity is usually framed in terms of racial or ethnic diversity, but we could also be talking about age, we could talk about gender, we could talk about gender expression, I mean, all of it, right? And my basic knowledge, and maybe this will be a subsequent webinar for us to do together, is a classic mistake we make is we go up to people who have no relationship with our organization or minimal relationship, and we say, hi, would you be on the board? And we're sort of plucking leaders out of thin air, as opposed to building a process of engaging people, having them volunteer a little, having them volunteer a little more, having them take some responsibility, having them start to prioritize our organization in their lives, and then saying to them, hey, would you be a leader in our group? And, you know, if you have donors, if you have volunteers, if you have people out there pulling invasive species or planting trees or cleaning up the riverbank or, you know, doing the classic grunt volunteer work, that's a place to start. And the question is, then what do we do with those people next to engage them, not just with their physical labor, but with their minds and their hearts and their ideas? And so you need something like a volunteer pyramid where you're thinking in terms of what are the tasks that we can move people up. And this is how you're going to have a process for building, I think, a more diverse board, but also one that's already committed to your organization before they get on the board. And as Cheryl noted, and, you know, I'm teasing you, Cheryl, and I'm not, she's like, I can't wait that long or I'm impatient. And it's a process. And, you know, you might have to have a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan to actually turn the board over. And that's real. That's legit. So I want to move on.
And we tried it the other way and it didn't work. So I'll try to be patient. Thank you, Andy. One real important, I think a really good comment that Amy Arndt, who's on our Corfa board, she's with Friends of Ottawa. She's their executive director. She says, we briefly discussed the need to recruit younger people to take over organizational leadership roles. And then that immediately sent my head to yes, and then you have to change everything that your current board is doing: time of meeting, place of meeting, work that's amount that's done. And Amy knows that all too well because she's one of those young folks.
So, I mean, here's some basic questions like, do you offer childcare so that people can come to a board meeting? Do you offer transportation? Do you have a Zoom option? Maybe, I mean, I as I mentioned, I chair a board. We went to Zoom during the pandemic for board meetings, as many of us did. We're still on Zoom. And, you know, I have board members who live 45 minutes or an hour away who do not want to get in the car on a winter night in Vermont and drive through the snow to a board meeting. And I don't blame them. And so in one accessibility, we have somebody else who's got MS and she can drive and get there, but it's a project. So, you know, we've decided that Zoom is our baseline now, and we do a good Zoom meeting. It's efficient, it's engaging, it's you know, it's possible. So, and then we do have people at home with kids and they don't have to get childcare because the kids are running around in the background while they're on the board meeting. So yeah, if you want younger people, you have to accommodate all the things Amy said, right? And I'm adding a few more to the list. So that's a culture change, and that's what we're talking about today. So let me tell you a sad story from my own life. In 1986, I killed the first nonprofit organization I ever worked for. And I'm not proud of this story, but it's instructive. This was one of those awesome all-volunteer organizations, and I was on the board, and I will tell you, I was like 26 years old, and I think maybe this was the best board I've ever been on. And we decided to take the leap, and we decided to hire a staff person, and I raised my hand, and I said, I can do this. And they're like, yeah, you'd be good. So they hired me, and in many ways, I was good. I raised a lot of money. I expanded the programming. We pulled off a major, big project. But what happened during that whole time was, as I was literally doing everything, all those board members were drifting away. And when I quit a couple of years later, there was like nobody behind me. And, you know, it's exploded. So when I left, there was sort of nothing there. And I will argue that I had failed the first test of leadership, which is, how do you empower others to do the work rather than do it myself? And I want to stress that I'm now, whatever I am, 66 years old, I'm still struggling with this. I chair a board. Nobody wants to follow me. I extended my board service for an additional year because there was nobody behind me. And I am working really hard to find who the next person is. But ultimately, it's not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of the whole board. So I think there are barriers here. One barrier is personal. And this is especially true if you're a founder or a longtime leader of the organization and you have your way of doing it, and you're afraid that whoever follows you is going to do it differently, which equals worse. So there's this whole lack of trust thing that plays out here. On the organizational level, most of you are under-resourced, right? You don't have enough money, you don't have enough people, so you're sort of dealing with the crisis that's in front of you. And succession planning is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's thinking a long time down the road. And it's hard to do that if you're dealing with what's in front of you right now. And, speaking therapeutically here, succession planning by definition is asking for help. It's saying, okay, I'm not going to do this forever. None of us can do this forever. We need to think about how we get support and help so that others can take it over. And I think some people perceive this as a sign of weakness, or they don't want to be a lame duck. And we got to get over that. And it's worth noting that your organization sort of belongs to everybody, right? Most of you are 501c3s, not all of you, but that means you're given a tax exemption by the federal government. You're registered and chartered by your state. People who give you money can tax deduct it, right? But what that means in exchange for that is you have to do a public good. And you really are owned by all of us. And so this whole question of, well, this is my organization, or we don't do it this way because it's, actually you're accountable to not just each other on the board or in the organization, but you're accountable to the whole community. And you need to step up and own that. So I want to propose a spectrum here, and we're going to ask you where you are.
Andy, excuse me, before we move on, there are a couple of good questions. Can I throw those in?
This is a perfect time.
Okay, we have found that episodic volunteers are easy to get, but organizational volunteers for leadership are hard, which goes back to the conversation we were having, I think. And then the next one is from Lane Yoshida, and he lives on the Big Island in Hawaii. Is there a mix ratio of local or distant board members? I live on the island of Hawaii, and a good portion of one board live off island, as do most members.
Yeah, it's an awesome question, Lane. It would depend on your mission to some degree. Now, if you are, and most of you are on this call, supporting a refuge or hatchery or whatever you're supporting, I'm guessing that some of your off-island people are either seasonal residents or regular visitors, or maybe they just love Hawaii and don't come there very often. They can still help. I mean, they're not going to be there to pull invasive plants, right? But they can help with fundraising and planning and outreach and relationship building. So I don't know that it's an excellent question. I don't think there's an optimal ratio. I think it's more based on building that matrix of these are the skills we need and these are the relationships we need and this is the diversity we're aiming for. And if that means that we have 2 board members in Oregon and 1 in California and 1 in Alaska and 2 in Michigan and it still gets the work done, I think that's fine. Again, we have Zoom, we have tools for engaging people remotely. So it's a brave new world. And I like the question. The only concern I would have, and this is the cultural question, is whether the people on the board who live in Hawaii would feel overwhelmed by the mainlanders or people who live elsewhere. And if there's enough cultural differences there that it creates some sort of friction around your mission. And I'm not smart enough to answer that question, but I think you have to raise that question and think about it. Thank you, Cheryl. That was good. So where are you on this spectrum? Like at one end of the spectrum is, and this is me, full disclosure, is, you know what, screw it, I'll just do it myself, it's easier. At the other end of the spectrum is you're really good at supporting and training and empowering and helping other people build their skills and claim their power. So I want to propose a bit of a continuum or a spectrum here. And in a minute, we'll post this as a poll. On one end, default setting is just do it myself. Next level down, I'm going to hand things off, but supervise closely to make sure they're done the way I like. Next level down, hand things off, and I'm going to basically trust they get done, however that happens. Next level down, supporting others and learning new tasks. And finally, constantly looking for ways to make myself unnecessary. So this is a personality type question. Where do you see yourself on the spectrum? And I'm betting this is a question no one has ever asked you before. Give you another 10 seconds. Most of you are in. If you're flummoxed by this, you're welcome to sit out. Last call. Pretty cool. Share the results, please. So we have 6 people in the first group, 4 people in the second group, 12 people in the middle group, 8 people. And we have 2 people who said constantly looking for ways to make myself unnecessary. Let it be stated that those 2 people jumped into the poll first. I'm not sure what that means, but it feels significant. So not surprisingly, we're all over the map here. And that's how personality tests work. I only bring this up because as we're doing succession planning, you need to know where you sit on this, because it may be influencing how you think about this problem or how think about this opportunity. So we're going to make this go away. Thank you. And we're going to go to the next slide. So I want to spend some time on the nuts and bolts here. And this is me sort of running through some slides and giving you some content. Ultimately, you need more than one plan, right? You need a contingency plan, which is if you lose a leader unexpectedly. Somebody moves away without a lot of advance notice. Somebody gets ill, ends up in the hospital. God forbid somebody passes away. Somebody takes another job without a lot of notice. What do you do? The other part of this plan is the long-term leadership succession plan, which is how are we building capacity to hand off skills, relationships, knowledge from one generation to the next. And as we indicated earlier, that could be a multi-year process. I'm going to give you one more breakout here. And I'm going to give you my answers to this in a minute, but I want to give you a chance to talk with each other about this. If you were building a succession plan, and I would say both a short-term contingency and a long-term transition plan, both of those things, and you can jump back and forth, it might be some of the same stuff. What would you include? So you're gonna design this based on your own wisdom, and this is basically a brainstorm. We're going to put you in a group with 4 or 5 other people. You're going to have about 5 or 6 minutes. Again, you can introduce yourself quickly. We'll shuffle the deck and you'll have mostly different people to talk to this time. And go ahead and see if you can answer this question. What topics would you include in your succession plan? So Eden, do the magic thing. And we'll see you all back here in about 5 minutes. Yeah, I mean, and Sue, another product that people have been using is something called the Owl, which is a camera that swivels around based on who's speaking, and it's not great, but it's sort of interesting to use. And that if you're doing hybrid meetings, that may be worth exploring.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. I'd be curious as to what you're going to put on your succession plan document. So go ahead and fill up the chat box, if you will. And just type in anything you guys talked about in terms of if we were going to build a written succession plan, what would we include in that document? I'd love to hear that. Sue, I'm going to pick on you now.
Oh
You
boy.
haven't had a chance. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to come up with a whole list, but tell me one item that you would put on a succession plan.
Well, in looking at our group, I think one of our largest issues is the barrier to diversity. And I would somehow write some plans for the future to include discussion about barriers to diversity.
Great. That's a really, embedding a diversity plan in a succession plan is a really good idea. Joan, I'm going to ask you, and then Cheryl, you can feed us some stuff from chat here. Joan, what's one thing you would include?
That's a good one.
I think that one of the things that I was thinking of is that, you know, clearly define where do we think that we want to be going so that we can build the plan that supports that.
Okay. So let me restate this. Thank you. I think this is important. In the ideal world, the first thing you do is create some sort of strategic plan that says, here's where we're going. The second thing you do is you say, okay, who do we need to make this plan happen, right? Who are the people? What communities do they represent? What skills do they have? What relationships do they have? How much time do they have, right? But yeah, first question is, where are we heading as an organization? What is our program plan? What is our facilities plan? All that stuff. And then, who do we need to implement this? So that'd be rational. And we don't always do that. Sometimes we're doing these things on parallel tracks, and that's okay. We're doing the strategic plan while we're figuring out who we're going to recruit. That's okay. It's not terrible. All right, Cheryl, what are we hearing in chat?
Okay, Michael says, identify where to look for potential board members. Identify which board members will be approaching new board members.
Yes.
Actively and regularly talk about progress. Sue Hicks, who is our newsletter editor for Corfa and WRA newsletter, need to have contingency plans written, processes and procedures, job descriptions, a vision for direction in the next 5 to 10 years. Harold says, where are all the important papers? And Marvin follows that up by location of all files. I have to add a little sidelight there. We found out during COVID that no one except our store manager knows the combination to the safe. What happens if she disappears? Nobody could get into the safe. Anyway, knowledge of the mission of the refuge, where the passwords, checkbook, and so on are located. For contingency, rely on seasoned, quote, board members to fill in until next election and make sure access to files. Interpersonal relationships for donor development, understanding of how the government works, and patience to go along with it. Spheres of influence. Who do each of us talk with about the mission-based work we do? Nuts and bolts of the organization, day-to-day operations. Who are the partners? Create board handbook, understand who our board members are and why they're here. Volunteer pyramid with focus on diversity. All board members extend an invitation to volunteers to participate in a Friends event. Have a place for all details, knowing and sharing your mission. Groom everyone for future leadership through small opportunities. Matthew Emmer, who has worked real closely with Corfa and NWRA on our advocacy project right now. If you're looking as a specific person to take over the organization, go ahead and start prepping the group for the new person's vision. That is, it will be a different organization when a new leader takes over. Be ready for change. And Amy Arndt says who the current board knows and how we can get them hooked on refuges.
Beautiful. You all nailed this, so thank you very much. I think if we put on, and Eden, if we can, save the chat log, and we could send that out with the slide deck. So make a note, because I think that would be great, because there's a lot of good stuff in chat today. So here's what I would include, and this is redundant to a lot of what you all said, but at least it's here in a couple of slides. You need a calendar. What happens when? If you're actually looking for a new executive director or CEO, those of you who are staffed, are you looking inside? You're looking outside? Maybe both. You need to clarify the roles of who's doing what throughout the transition, because there's often a lot of muddiness during that time period, and you need to talk it out and get it written down. You need a communications plan. And this is both internal and external. Internal is you got to let board staff, primary partners know what's going on, and you got to message it, how are we talking about this? And then, there's probably going to be a news release or something that goes out to your e-list or stuff that you post on social media talking about this. You need to budget for this. Transitions cost money. And I would even argue if you're still an all volunteer organization and you're bringing in new board members and that's your primary focus in terms of succession planning, there's a cost to that too. Certainly it's time, but maybe there's a little whining and dining involved, or, maybe you're giving people t-shirts and caps or, some sort of swag to acknowledge that they're now part of the board. And I don't mean bribery, but I think you should be thinking about how do you accommodate people? I mean, one thing, I think this is an accessibility piece. If you are having in-person board meetings and you're doing it during mealtime, you should be feeding people. You should have a budget and you should cater the board meeting, or you should do a rotating potluck where you have different people who are bringing in food each time and it rotates amongst the board. Because I think it's one of the ways that you can show appreciation to people, show that you love them, is to feed them. It's very old. It's certainly intercultural and around the world. Somebody mentioned this, I forget, maybe it was Amy, but you need to actually transition relationships. You need to hand people off. You need to, whoever is the relationship manager needs to bless the next person who is handling that relationship. So it might be a relationship with the feds. It might be a relationship with the state. It might be a relationship with a funder or donor. It might be partner relationships. Might be relationships with the news media. But you need to actively say, I am stepping back, and Joan or Eden or Cheryl or whoever is following me and will be taking on my portfolio, and I want you to meet them and they're great. And be intentional about that. And then if people are leaving, and this could be an individual executive director, or it could be a founder, or it could be a class of board members who are terming off the board at the same time, have a party. Honor them. Make it, a little ritual goes a long way to making people feel valued. And I would say is even when people leave a board or leave an organization, you want to keep them connected. You want to continue to have work for them to do. You want them to continue to give money or time or both. And so we have to have processes that even after the transition, we are keeping these people in the game. So this is a collective problem,
Andy,
collective
Andy,
opportunity. Yeah, please.
Andy, can I interrupt one more time? There was an interesting comment in the chat that I think may reflect on a lot of small groups. We need to have a complete reorganization. That is, new board members and a central place to store all of our paperwork, not at the home of two board members who are husband and wife. We must have term limits, and a part of the planning should state that not a husband and wife should serve on the board at the same time. We have no access to files. The two board members that are husband and wife are not leaving but dictating. We are down to 3 board members, and a few volunteers with talent have been pushed out. I think because, particularly with small groups, things like this happen all the time. You hear about them.
It's true. Well, I think what whoever wrote is accurate. I would say it's going to be a fairly gnarly process to unwind that one. And you're going to need some diplomacy and maybe some external pressure. And I'm not sure where the external pressure comes from. Maybe it comes from the Refuge, who says we want to make sure that your organization has a leadership succession plan. And so please share that with us. Or it might be from a funder who says, I want to make sure that you guys are set up for the next generation. What is that going to look like? And what redundancy do you have in your systems so that people have access to the files and have access to operational stuff that you use? So I think having an internal conversation about that is good. I think what you probably need to think about is there's somebody outside of the organization that can lean on that couple in a good way so that they understand that responsibility and accountability needs to be spread throughout the board. But it's going to be difficult. So if you're feeling like it's a struggle, I want to honor that. It probably is. Which actually leads to this next question that's on the screen. It's like, I think we have a collective responsibility to help each other do this. And the each other is, all the people on the board or people in your organization, but I mean across organizations. I mean, this session is open and we've got probably 25 or 30 different groups present today. So I'm gonna give this to my august helpers here. How do we support each other in doing this better? Joan, you get to go first.
Thank you, Andy.
You want to pat? You can say you can go tag Cheryl. You're it. You could do that if you want.
I would just say there's one thing that we have been playing with and trying to figure out how we get the resources to do it is,
Yep.
okay, we have these webinars, but can we have calls like once a month or once every, and friends just
Nice.
join in and we
Yes.
pick a topic and we're there to try to help one another out, share what's working, what's not working. So we do something like that. But we're looking, and Sue has put this in the next issue of the Friends newsletter. We're looking for folks who can help facilitate those meetings.
Yeah, because you need someone to hold the space and start the conversation. I think it's a lovely idea, and what's nice is no preparation is required other than a very light piece of facilitation.
Mhm.
So that's a good answer, is just create people, places, and opportunities for people to come together and share what they're working on and share what their challenges are. Good. I love it. It's simple. It's beautiful. Sue, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. I think having folks know that they're contributing and engaging, I would think just trying to bring them in to engage, to say, hey, we need help. We need help, and your role can be this, quote unquote, and it is going to help us do this, quote unquote.
Good.
So it would be sort of let those folks understand their role in how it can be successful.
Yeah, and how it connects to the work of other people so they can see that they're part of a larger thing. I think that's great. Cheryl, you can speak for yourself or you can share what's in chat on this question.
Okay, I think I shared all the chat so far, but the thing you made me think about, Andy, was we just had a really emotional executive committee meeting last night, that most of which boiled down to the fact that we're all trying to do way more than we're capable of doing well, and that's frustrating. And one of the things that I kept finding was, or kept thinking of, was when we need help, we go to other board members, but we don't go beyond that. And Joan kind of referred to this too. We don't go to the membership or to somebody who's come to a couple of restoration parties or whatever,
right,
and ask them if they can do a little more or if they'd be interested in doing something. We do it in the newsletter or on a Facebook post or something like that, but we don't do it personally.
Yes.
That's also a way to bring more people into active involvement in the group. But it takes time. It's like it's so much faster and easier to just do it yourself.
Yeah, and I think we have to resist that impulse. Because you know what? I mean, I'm like the model of the burnout zone. I mean, I'm doing okay, but I think that if you have that default button and you just do it yourself, you become a martyr.
Right.
So at least your group is naming that to each other, and you get points for that. And then the question is, what are you all going to do about it? Let us go to the next slide here. I got a little more content, and then we'll take some questions, and we're done. So if you're the leader, whatever that means, chair of the board, informal leader group, executive director, whatever your job is, here's like 10 things you can do to be a better succession person. First of all, hand off some stuff that you like to do. And I mean the word like to do, not just the grunt stuff that you don't want to do. Like, take something that you think is engaging and interesting, give it to somebody else. Do not be a perfectionist. Other people will do things differently than you. It's okay. Which gets to the next bullet here, which is encouraging others to learn by giving them the space to fail. And not being critical about that, but being supportive about that. Let people try new stuff, encourage them to do it. If you're the one who runs the meeting, spread that responsibility around. I mean, I chaired a board meeting last night and I had 3 or 4 different people leading different parts of the meeting. And they were queued up to do it in advance. They knew that, but that's helpful because it is a leadership skill. You have 2 ears, you have 1 mouth. There's a reason for that. And I feel like good leadership is largely about listening and hearing other people's perspectives and trying to integrate them into your own thinking. There are cultural dimensions to leadership. It doesn't all look like John Wayne and General MacArthur, right? There's different styles of leadership based on gender and social class and age and all of it. And I think we need to be sensitive to that. And frankly, we need to celebrate it. Now, here's a fun idea. Those of you who know your Shakespeare will realize that in many of the tragedies, there's a king, and when there's a king, there's a fool. And the job of the fool is to tell the king when he's being an ass, when he's making a fool of himself. And often the fool gets whipped for telling the truth, but the fool is always around at the end of the play. It's no one who gets killed. And I think for those of us who are in leadership, we need a fool. We need somebody to call us out, probably in private, but maybe in public, and say, wait a minute, you're not honoring your commitment, or you said you were going to step back, or you said you were going to let other people lead stuff, and yet you keep inserting yourself. Are you serious about this? And so someone has to be your truth teller. And I think it's helpful to have at least one and maybe even more than one. Term limits. I'm a total believer in term limits for the board. I'm starting to think that term limits for staff, leadership staff, isn't a bad idea. One way we create new leadership is by mandated turnover. And there are pros and cons, and smart people disagree about this, but at least I'm putting a marker down that's worth discussing. So here's an interesting idea. If you're a founder or a long-term leader, sit down with a cup of coffee or a beer or a glass of wine or whatever you like, and create a will. When I leave the organization, this is what I want to leave behind. This is what I want it to look like when I'm done. And share it with other people, because other people might have a different idea of what that might look like, but it's a way to have that conversation. So it's not below the surface, it's on the surface, it's above the surface. Now, if you're of a certain age, and that's most of you, I hope, you should be planning for your own retirement. And what that usually means is you put away a certain amount of money every month, or you have benchmarks you're trying to hit. And maybe you have a planner who's helping you do that. I think you think about this task the same way. I aspire, note to whomever, I aspire to be off of this board in the next 2 years, or I aspire not to be the chair in 18 months, or I'm the executive director and I'm thinking 3 years from now, I'm ready to go on to another job. And so what benchmarks do I have to hit in the interim so that when I leave well? Again, a challenging question. Like, how do you measure that? But it might be, the growth of volunteers, or other people are doing tasks that you're currently doing. Or when somebody has a problem and the phone rings, it's not your phone. They're calling somebody else to solve the problem. Now, if you're not the leader, you work with the leader, and the leader is entrenched and really needs to move on. Note to whoever said we got this couple who has all the files and they won't give them up. You gotta do your homework. You gotta prepare for this. You gotta line up some allies. That was my first piece of advice in that case, is find some people outside of the organization who can help you shift the power dynamic. You can't just show up and start complaining about this. You need to be strategic. And, the messaging is always about, we are an organization with a long-term mission. None of us are going to be here forever. How do we strengthen the group so that when the next generation comes in to run it, and even the generation after that, how do we make sure we're handing them something that's stronger than we've got? And the old thing I learned years ago was, when you go camping, you want to leave the campsite in better shape than you found it. And it's the same metaphor. You clean up whatever mess is there, at least clean it up as best you can, so that when you're handing it to the next person, it's reasonably good shape. So we're going to take a few questions. Before that, I want to say a bit about my own individual succession plan. I am sort of gradually winding down my business. And so I am semi-retired. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm figuring it out. But what it's been for me is, I'll do a webinar, I'll lead a workshop, I'll facilitate a meeting. I don't want to do a 6-month strategic plan. I don't want to hold a client's hand for 2 years while they go through some long transition. I want to get in, do my work, get out. So that's been a way for me to think about how do I wind down my business and how do I send more work to other people who do what I do, because I can give them the long-term gigs that I don't want to do and I can keep some of the short-term ones for myself. And I think we all have to sort of think about what are the steps we're taking in our own transitions as we move away from our own organizations or we move into different roles. Love this quote: part of leading well is leaving well. Don Tebby is one of the smart people who thinks about this stuff a lot. And, yes, we're all leaving. How are we leaving? Are we going to leave well, or are we going to leave a mess behind us? So I think we all aspire to leave well. Then you have to figure out what that looks like. So I'm going to turn off the slides for a minute and we get to any additional Q&A. As I say, we'll stay into overtime if needed to answer additional questions. And you can drop a question into chat, or if you're moved to do so, you can raise your Zoom hand and unmute and we'll call on you. So either of those is fine. If there's no questions, that's cool, but I imagine there might be a question or two. So anybody want to ask?
Sorry, there's one in the chat. Do you want to do that one first? Or
yes.
Okay, our board needs to learn to be more civil in meetings. The poor conflict resolution skills discourages visiting members from joining.
This is Eric. I'm with Friends of the Wichita's and the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. Can you hear me?
I can. Eric, I'm going to pause
with my audio.
Eric, I'm going to pause you for a second and try and answer that first question, and then we'll get to you next.
That may be Eric.
It's Eric's question?
So
okay, great. Keep going. My bad.
That's right.
Keep going.
Oh, sorry.
Is there anything you want to add to what Cheryl read?
I was just going to say my audio has been bad, so if I drop out, just go on without me. Well, I'm just aware that succession gets difficult when morale is bad. People don't want to move into new positions or positions of leadership, or they don't want to join if they've experienced the infighting, which currently, coincidentally, on our board is in part about succession and people letting go of authority and moving and stepping down. So I'm running for president. If I'm elected, one of my primary goals will to try to reinstate more civility in our meetings. But any people have experience with that or suggestions, I would welcome it.
Okay, I will start this, and if other people have thoughts, put them in chat. Here's a crazy idea that might work. I would see if there are 2 or 3 other board members who serve on other boards of peer organizations, partners, groups that you know in your community that you admire. And I would invite them to do a little panel discussion with your board. And the panel discussion is, how do you handle conflict within your organizations? Like if you have disagreements on the board, how do you address that? And just give them a chance to talk about that, some Q&A. Basically this is like collecting wisdom from peers. It's a way of outing yourselves a little bit, because if you're asking the question, how do you deal with conflict, you're admitting that you have some within your own group, and that may or may not fly with some of your members. But I would want to hear from other nonprofits that you guys admire and see how they handle that. And then after the guests are, done with their presentations and Q&As, you send them off and you continue the board meeting. And the next question is, okay, that's the big kids table, right? Those are the good groups. This is how they deal with it. Do we want to sit with the big kids table, or do we want to keep doing the things the way we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a bit of a Hail Mary. It might not work, but I would start there. And if other people have thoughts on this, feel free to jump in.
Matthew put a comment in the Matthew, why don't you come off mute and offer your comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's always a good idea to just what I've heard called walk the board.
Yeah.
Invite people for like one-on-one coffee breaks, get to know them, let them do the talking, and that it's good in general, practice in general, but it might help in this case restore some civility amongst your board members.
Yeah, it's great. If people vent in private, they're less likely to vent in public, just because they've gotten the charge off. If I were going to come and I'm not going to do this, but if I was going to come and facilitate a meeting with your board, I would want to talk to all of them individually first to say what's going on, what's your experience of it, what would you like to see, how do you feel about it? And then when they come into the meeting, they're less loaded for bear because they've had a chance to express that to somebody. And maybe I've built some trust with them. So I think Matthew's giving you good advice. Other questions you'd like to ask?
Kathy also suggests as an answer, I like the panel, but board training can take you there too, maybe with extension. I'm assuming that's like the extension service, college extension service, or your chamber.
Yeah. And there are consultants who do that work as well, and many of them do it well. So, yeah, and you know, some of you, this is harsh, but I'll just say it. Some of you may remember a group called the Gray Panthers. Long ago, it's a senior citizen advocacy organization. And they had a mantra, and their mantra was, "We outlived our enemies, and so can you." And, you know, depending on who the troublemakers on the board are, maybe you wait them out. And it's sooner or later they will leave, and then the culture will improve. And it's not a great answer because it's not proactive, but it may be where you're stuck. Anything else anyone wants to ask? While you're considering, I'm going to show a couple more slides, and then if there are no questions, we can do a wrap. So let me share the screen. Love this. Little bit of promotion here. I am the author of a bunch of books, and this is probably the most relevant one to today's topic. It's called What Every Board Member Needs to Know, Do, and Avoid. And you can look for it in the usual places, and the publisher's link is up there as well. And then if anyone wants to contact me, follow-up questions, or you have some work for me or whatever, this is how you find me. And this is a good opportunity for me to, again, to thank Eden and Sue and Cheryl and Joan and everyone who helped to hold up the space and get you here and get me here. So last call, if there's any other questions or comments, this is your moment. Cool. Now, what I will do, Eden, I will send this to you. We're going to send you the slide deck. We're going to send you the chat log. We're going to send you the recording link. What I'm also going to send you, Eden, is I'm doing a webinar next week on change management, which is totally adjacent to what we're talking about today. And we'll send you all a link for that. That is on the 27th. So it's a week from today. It's sponsored by the Community Resource Center in Colorado. And I'll make sure you get a link to that in the follow-up materials. And if anyone wants to come and join me next week for another webinar on how to manage change effectively, I think you'll find it useful. Are there wrap-up announcements? Sue, was that you?
Yep, I don't think so, everyone. I think I want to thank everyone for coming today. And of course, thank Andy for his time and his expertise. And we have tremendous amount of information. I'm sitting here thinking about the next 2 years in my head, which is too many spinning plates for me, but I really appreciate it. And we will get together again in October. And I believe the date is October 18th. So it's the third Wednesday of the month. Awesome. Andy, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you.
Be well. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.